My name is Sarah. I'm 27 years old and I live alone in a small apartment on the 6th floor of a building that, honestly, has never given me any problems. It's a quiet place, with neighbors I hardly ever see. I work from home, so I don't need to go out much. Many will think my life is boring, and hell yeah, it is. I like the routine. It keeps me in control. A few weeks ago, I decided to install a door cam on my apartment door. A basic one. I didn't want to spend too much money, just to know if the delivery had arrived or if someone had knocked on the door while I was busy. At first, nothing interesting happened. The pizza delivery guy, a couple of kids playing in the hallway, normal stuff. But one day, the camera picked up something I wasn't expecting. I got a notification on my phone. Someone's at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I got up from the couch and went to look. When I got there, I didn't hear any noise, not even footsteps walking away. I approached the door, and instead of opening it, looked through the crack. There he was, a man standing perfectly still, staring fixedly at the door. He didn't say a word, didn't make a gesture. He just stood there, eyes fixed on the door. I froze for a few seconds, unable to understand what the hell was going on. It was no one I recognized. I panicked, but thought maybe it was some drunken neighbor who had mistaken the door. I could actually see a bottle in his hand. I decided to ignore him. I waited a few minutes until he was gone, put on some music, and tried to distract myself. The next night, another notification. Someone is at the door. This time I didn't hesitate to go and see who it was. I knew what I would find, but I forced myself to go. Again, the same man standing there, not moving. He was doing nothing, just staring at the door. There was no knocking, no attempt to open it. It was as if he was waiting for something. I double-locked the door and went back to bed, trying to convince myself that it was nothing serious. It could be some crazy guy in the building, some weirdo. I alerted the manager to have him kicked out and told him he was making me uncomfortable. But when I looked at the camera later, I saw that the man had left just before the security guard, who patrols the hallway from time to time, arrived. The cycle repeated itself over the next few days, always at different times in the early morning. The man would come, stand in front of my door, and stand there. I would look through the camera, but he never did anything. I tried to talk to the building manager and even contacted the police, but there was no way to catch him. He was gone before anyone could get there, and no one knew who he was or how he got into the building. The neighbors didn't know who he was either. Some told me they hadn't seen anyone. Others suggested that maybe it was someone who lived nearby. But no one had a concrete answer. The nights became unbearable. The same routine day after day. It got to a point where I could hardly sleep, knowing he would be back. One night, I received the usual notification, but something was different. When I checked the camera, no one was there. The hallway was empty. For a few seconds, I was relieved. I thought maybe it was finally over. But that relief was short-lived. I got out of bed and went to the door. Even though I saw no one, something nudged me to check. I looked through the crack and confirmed that nothing was there, but when I turned around to go back to bed, I realized something creepy. The apartment window was open. The most disturbing thing is that I live on the 6th floor, and although it was impossible for someone to come in from the outside, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were emergency stairs outside the building, leading from the 2nd floor up. I tried to calm down. Maybe I was paranoid, but then, in the reflection of the window, I saw it. I was not alone. I turned sharply, and there he was. The man who had been outside my door for weeks was now inside my apartment. The worst thing wasn't his presence, it was his smile. A huge smile that made me feel nauseous. He walked slowly toward me, a bottle in his hand.
I've always wanted to see you up close. You're prettier than I imagined.
My legs were shaking, but I tried to hold myself together. I couldn't let panic consume me. I already set the alarm in my room, got away, and walked out the door. It's not worth losing everything for one wrong move. You can still escape.
But to me, you're everything. I know everything about you, Sarah. What time you get up, when you go to bed, what you buy at the supermarket. I've always been around, watching you. You only see me through the door, but I see you all the time.
I felt a lump in my throat as he began to describe my every daily move with sickening precision. How I sat at my computer to work, how I drank my coffee at 9 a.m. Everything. He knew it all. The man stopped a few steps away from me. His smile faded and his gaze became vacant.
I'm here to make you my wife. We're going to be together, Sarah. Let's get married.
He took one more step, and panic swept over me. My eyes searched desperately for something to defend myself with until I saw the knife on the kitchen counter. Without thinking, I grabbed it with trembling hands and pointed it at him. He didn't seem intimidated. He kept moving slowly forward, smiling again as if he knew I wasn't going to use the knife. And he was right. I didn't dare. With surprising speed, he snatched the knife from my hands and threw it to the ground.
Don't worry, even the perfect wife needs a little training.
Without warning, he tore my pant from knee to foot with the knife blade. I was paralyzed with pain and fear. He leaned toward me, his face inches from mine, as he murmured,
We're going to have a beautiful night. I'm going to make you beautiful, even if you don't want me to.
That's when, in the impulse of desperation, I kicked him in the face with all my might. The man fell backward, staggering. I seized the opportunity, ran to the window, and opened it wide. I knew that if I didn't do something now, I wouldn't get another chance. The emergency stairs were just below. I thought of nothing else. I climbed onto the windowsill and started down. The man's footsteps echoed behind me. I heard his breathing hitch as he followed me. He was coming down fast, faster than me. I wasn't going to make it to the second floor in time, so from the second floor, I jumped. My foot twisted as I fell, and I felt a sharp pain shoot through my leg. I crawled desperately toward the street. He stood on the edge, looking down, paralyzed. He screamed like a frightened child.
Sarah, come back! I can't come down! I'm afraid of heights! I could barely climb up! Don't make me come down!
His screams continued until police sirens approached and arrested him. I lay on the sidewalk, tears in my eyes and my leg broken, but alive. Weeks have passed since that night. The man was arrested. He never revealed who he was, how he got into the building, or what he wanted to do to me. I have moved apartments, and the paranoia of someone else breaking in as he did terrified me. Anyway, no matter where I move to, I always feel unsafe. Even sleeping with a gun hidden near me, I feel that sooner or later, something terrible will happen, and I won't be able to react in time.
I never considered myself a paranoid person. I never understood those who look 4 times before closing the door, or who are startled by a noise in the middle of the night. We lived in Seattle, a quiet neighborhood, away from all the chaos of downtown. My parents were Chinese immigrants, worked hard to give us a better life here. My mother was always very careful, a woman who made sure everything was in order. My father, on the other hand, was more laid back, a man who relied on people's kindness. Make no mistake, I always knew there were bad people on the street, but up to that point, I'd never encountered any of them. That night, my father had come home from work a little later than usual, even though it was still daylight since he was going to work in the early morning. It was not unusual for him to arrive tired, but this time he seemed more exhausted than usual. I watched him through the window as he came into the house, reaching into his pocket for his keys. My mother was in the kitchen, finishing up dinner. Outside, the afternoon was quiet as usual. I was just about to go say hello to my dad when I saw something out of the ordinary. 2 hooded men ran up to where my dad was. One of them had something in his hands. Before I could see what was happening, I ran to tell my mom. I heard a loud noise followed by a muffled scream. I ran down the stairs immediately, not knowing what I would find. I saw my father on the floor, convulsing, while two hooded men surrounded him. One held a taser in his hand, while the other kicked him mercilessly. I couldn't process what I was seeing. My father was being attacked in the open doorway of our own home. My first reaction was to run toward him, but one of the men looked in my direction and I just froze on the spot. Not out of fear, but out of pure survival instinct. My legs didn't want to respond, and in that second of indecision, they had already entered the house. They closed the door behind them and advanced. My mother heard the noises and appeared with a baseball bat. I don't know where she got the strength to face them, but it didn't last long. One of the guys disarmed her in one move, and she ended up on the floor next to my father, who had been dragged inside the house. They beat her repeatedly. Purely on instinct, I ran to the basement to hide. From the basement, I could hear the men talking to each other. They were not stealing anything. On the contrary, they were destroying everything in their path. They were breaking furniture, throwing dishes on the floor, tearing pictures off the wall. They were doing it with restrained anger, but they weren't taking anything. That was what alarmed me the most. This was no ordinary burglary. This was something else. I heard my parents being forced to sit together in the dining room. It sounded like they were handcuffed, though I couldn't be sure. My mother was trying to talk to them, pleading with them not to hurt us, but they ignored her. One of the guys, his voice deep and rough, started hurling insults. "You Chinese are good at math, aren't you? How many times do I have to break this stick over your head before you answer me?"
Come on. You wouldn't steal so much of our work if all you did was cry.
"Where's the kid?" They knew there was a child in the house. They had seen my picture in one of the pictures they had thrown to the floor. Now they were looking for me. I knew I didn't have much time before they went down to the basement. Footsteps began to sound closer to me. I knew they were coming down. One of the men was going through each room looking for me, and I heard him whisper to the other,
He's hiding in here somewhere. He's just a boy.
My heart was pounding, so hard I thought they could hear it from the pantry. I was terrified as I'd never been before in my life. From the little alcove where I stood, I could see one of them coming down the stairs. His figure moved with a terrifying tranquility, as if he was enjoying the game. I was searching, but not in a hurry. I knew that sooner or later I would find what I was looking for. I saw him open the closet and check behind the boxes, but he hadn't found me yet. That's when I heard something that made me hold my breath. The guy shouted to my father from the stairs.
Tell us where the brat is, or we'll kill you all.
His voice sounded serious, almost bored, as if he really didn't care about the outcome, but I knew he meant it. I may not have understood as a kid why they were doing this to us, if they weren't stealing anything. But now, a few years later, I understand everything. These people didn't care about our stuff. They didn't want to steal. They wanted to hurt us. For not being American. Just for being born somewhere else. The man who was searching the basement came dangerously close to my position. I could see him moving slower, inspecting every nook and cranny. I crouched a little lower, but there was no point. The man was already determined to look where I was. He was going to catch me and kill me for sure. Me and my parents. I was doomed. But just when I thought I was discovered, the other man shouted, approaching his partner. "That's enough. They said the boy went to his aunt's house."
And do you believe them?
"It doesn't matter. There are neighbors peeping through their windows. We have to leave now. Surely they've already called the police."
Wait, and we'll leave them alive?
"Do you want to take your time killing the witnesses too? And the CCTV? Didn't you see it the other day?" This is purely your fault. I won't be involved in a murder if we get caught." The guy in the basement stopped, stared at where I was hiding for a few eternal seconds, and finally turned around.
"Whatever. He's probably under his bed or something."
After that, they left. They left my parents handcuffed on the floor, bloody, but alive. They didn't kill them. Maybe they thought it would be easier to get out of the situation if they didn't kill them, in case they were caught. I heard them running away, afraid that someone else would see them. I waited a few more minutes before I dared to come out of hiding. When we went up to the second floor, the house looked like a battlefield. Everything was destroyed. My parents were still on the floor, badly wounded, but breathing. I don't know how, but I found the strength to untie them. My mother could barely speak, and my father was almost unconscious. But they were still alive. The police arrived almost immediately. The men were caught a few weeks later. They didn't try to run too far. In the end, it was a hate crime. They didn't want our money. They wanted to punish us for simply existing. Seeing them in handcuffs and being brought to trial gave me a kind of relief, but it didn't erase what they did. Those men may have been arrested, but at the same time, they are still everywhere. They are in every person who gives me dirty looks on the street. Every person who thinks that because I have Chinese parents, they can make all kinds of jokes to me, sometimes quite aggressive ones. Those men are in every person who says that I came from my country to take their job. Unfortunately, it's something I will have to live with every day. But you know, as sad as it sounds, I'm used to it.
I grew up in a single-parent household. Just me, my sister, and my mom, with my grandpa occasionally lending a hand with parenting duties. And when I was about 4 or 5 years old, we were broken into, twice. I didn't know all the details of the whole thing until years later. Like I have vague memories of moving apartments and some cops coming over to the house, but I was pretty much kept in the dark until I was old enough to handle what had gone down. For the first break-in, we were all out grocery shopping, so my mom didn't realize anything had happened until we got home. There was an open window, open drawers. The way my grandpa tells it, it's like my mom interrupted them in the middle of doing something and they climbed out of a second-floor window as soon as he'd heard us arrive. That, or whoever it was, just didn't care about people knowing he'd been there. The second break-in happened 3 months later, only this time the guy broke in at nighttime while we were all asleep. I had to get all this from my grandpa because understandably my mom hates talking about it, but the way he tells it, she basically woke up in the middle of the night and sensed a presence in the room with her. Not like a spirit or anything dumb like that, like an actual person. Then when she opened her eyes, there was someone standing next to her bed with something shiny in his hand. She told Grandpa she was literally frozen with terror, couldn't move, couldn't talk, literally petrified in the very sense of the word. Apparently the guy was mumbling something, but Mom couldn't remember exactly what. Then by the time she started begging him not to hurt her, she couldn't hear anything at all. My sister remembers walking into her room, thinking that she was having a nightmare. She asked Mom if she was okay. Mom threw the covers from over her head, saw the guy was gone, then noticed the second-floor window was open where the guy had used the same escape route as the first break-in. She put my little sister back to bed. I obviously have no memory of this because I was asleep. She called 911, then she called my grandpa. Grandpa said the cops found faint, muddy footprints all over the house, including in our bedrooms, so he'd obviously taken his time exploring the place before he'd woken my mom up. Only, this guy hadn't just been exploring. He'd been very, very busy, and it actually took us a few days to uncover all the bizarre little things he'd done, things which spoke to just how insane this person really was. The next day, when we noticed that the cat wouldn't touch her milk, Mom poured it out into the sink, thinking that it had gone sour, then got the distinct smell of bleach as she did so. She can't be certain, but she thinks the guy poured bleach into the cat's milk, wanting to kill it. Then there was the cracked empty eggs in the fridge. Not like cracked all the way, just little holes in the top with all the yolk and egg white missing. It's possible he just poured them down the sink, but Grandpa thinks the guy might have been sucking them raw. Not all that scary, I know, just freaky, you know? Mom says some meat was missing from the fridge too, raw meat. But I know Grandpa used to feed our cat from the fridge too, so we can't rule that out. A few days later, Grandpa came over in the evening for some dinner and offered to help prep for garbage day. He says one of the garbage cans spilled right as he got into the driveway, complains to my mom about tin cans in the garbage or whatever, and then goes on to clean up and finds what spilt it. Someone, presumably the guy who broke in, had thrown a pair of scissors in the trash, along with a clothing catalog he'd been cutting up. He cut the heads off almost every single model in that catalog, and the little paper heads were nowhere to be found. My grandpa thinks the guy took them as some kind of trophy, but who knows what he really did with them. Then there was the salt in my mom's work shoes, the knife missing from her knife block in the kitchen, obviously the shiny thing he'd been holding when she woke up to him in her room. Anyways, the cops got plenty of fingerprints, but whoever it was didn't have a record, and other than the muddy boot prints they found, there was nothing much to go on. So to this day, no one's been arrested for it, but my grandpa thinks he knows who it was. Years later, after we moved apartments twice in a bid to avoid the guy, a friend of a distant relative ended up getting locked up in some kind of psychiatric hospital. The guy had become obsessed with Alice in Wonderland, had all the books, multiple copies of them too, and all he ever talked about was the looking glass or Wonderland and all this stuff. It might just be a complete coincidence, but the thing is, that's my mom's name, Alice. She's over the whole thing now. It's been more than 20 years since all of that, but I know that if she doesn't like talking about it, even today, it had to have messed her up for a while.